Tidus is looking to be an incredible commander in the Final Fantasy set dropping in June, and I absolutely had to build a commander deck around him. Initially, I had no budget limit when building the deck, but I also wanted to build one with a budget that is as low as I could possibly get it while making a very solid deck. And surprisingly, I managed to build the deck that was under $40 that synergized very well with Tidus. This is that list. This video was created well in advance to any of the cards from the commander deck being known, so prices are definitely going to change, especially as the commander deck gets revealed and cards either are or are not in the deck. This list also doesn't include Tidus in the cost itself because he is like $60, and that is already over budget. You should be able to either proxy him or hopefully get him for relatively cheap once the set drops and all of these packs are being opened. One last thing before explaining Tidus. The timestamps are below, but this budget deck will follow a more traditional deck building outline, but I will explicitly show all 99 cards in the deck, as well as explain any of particular importance. So, what is our deck trying to do? Well, Tidus, Yuna's Guardian, is a 3-drop green, white, blue commander, who, at the beginning of combat on your turn, moves a counter from target creature you control onto a second target creature you control. He also has the Cheer ability, which states whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you may draw a card and proliferate. Do this only once a turn. The goal of our Tidus deck is to use, abuse, and move as many counters as we can, slowly building up a board that is hard to deal with, or even interact with for that matter. Let's first talk about our mana base and ramp spells that will let us cast our more important spells later on. Our mana base is surprisingly diverse for a deck under $40. 17 of our lands are basic, 5 plains, 6 islands, and 6 forests. We're able to run the full Mat Temple cycle, allowing us some top deck manipulation, and the check lands and 2 Tango lands allow us to run multicolored lands that can enter untapped. Beyond that, we're running 2 Pain lands, a couple creature lands, 2 cycling lands, Exotic Orchard, Command Tower, Seaside Citadel, and Nesting Grounds, which is essentially part of our commander on a land. Despite being a budget deck, there are quite a few good pieces of ramp in the deck as well, half of which even interact in a meaningful way with our commander. First, we have our traditional ramp pieces. Talisman of Curiosity, Soul Ring, and Arcane Signet are all decent staples. Wayfarer's Bauble is a tried and true way of getting a land into play and thinning your deck some. And Commander's Sphere can give you a card later in the game when it's no longer necessary. The rest of the mana is more in line with Tidus' game plan though. Basking Broodscale can adapt to put counters on itself to generate spawn, and then Tidus can move counters off so they can readapt, or simply put more +1/+1 counters onto the Broodscale directly. Pure Strain Gene Stealer achieves a similar effect, but puts basic lands directly into play on attacking instead of making sacrificable pawns. On the Trail is an interesting card that, upon drawing your second card each turn, allows you to put a land into play. This synergizes well with Tidus' ability to draw a second card each turn. Replicating Ring is another card that synergizes with Tidus, as you can work towards your 8th night counter being placed onto Replicating Ring faster via the proliferation. Finally, Staff of Completion is multifaceted. It's a mana rock, card draw, and even allows you to proliferate, all for only a handful of life. It's very solid in our deck. Next up, let's move on to the core of what our deck is trying to do, which is quite simply to put counters on creatures. Tidus is a deck that wants you to put a lot of counters on all of your creatures. Some cards in the deck enter and place a counter on a creature as a one-time effect, such as Kappa Tech Wrecker, Dusk Shellcrawler, Parry the Pulverizer, Wingfold Terran, and Arwen Mortal Queen. These last 2 cards specifically are incredibly important, as you can move around their hexproof and indestructible counters and even proliferate them, hopefully building up a board of untargetable, unkillable creatures. Primal Empathy, Trigon Prime, Crystalline Giant, Reluctant Role Model, and Family's Favor all add 1 counter to either themselves or 1 or 2 other creatures per turn. We also have ways to give all of our creatures counters via Mikaeus the Lunarch and Johnny Greyhearted. Finally, there are a few ways to put a bunch of counters onto a single creature all at once. When Communal Brewing enters, you can have any number of opponents draw a card, and then you'll put that many ingredient counters +1 onto the enchantment. After this, whenever you cast a creature spell, that creature will enter with X additional +1/+1 counters, where X is the number of ingredient counters on Communal Brewing. The best part about this is that you can proliferate the ingredient counters on the card via Tidus, and steadily increase the amount of counters it adds to your creatures. This means that you could even choose to not have any of your opponents draw a card, and still eventually get up to 4, 5, even more counters. Then there's Warden of the Grove. It puts a counter on itself at the end of your turn, and whenever another non-token creature enters, you can Endure X, where X is the number of counters on the Warden. Endure is a new keyword from Tarkir Dragonstorm that allows you to either put X +1/+1 counters on the creature, or create an XX White Spirit creature token. Something I didn't catch until making the script for this video was that the Warden of the Grove cares about all counters on it, not just +1/+1 counters. This means if you can move a few ability counters onto it and proliferate via Tidus, your creatures will endure for very large amounts very quickly. I'm honestly surprised this card is under $2 and expect that it probably won't be for very long. On top of all this, cards like Lae'zel, Vlaakith's Champion, and Conclave Mentor allow you to put additional counters onto your creatures, with Lae'zel even doubling up those ability counters that they enter with. Zimone, Paradox Sculptor, and Vorel of the Hullclade can double the counters on your creatures and artifacts. While Vorel can double the counters on your manlands without needing to turn them on, Zimone provides her own counter support, putting counters onto creatures in the first place. Next, most impressively, there are 3 key cards that perform incredibly well in the deck. Denry Klein, Editor-in-Chief, enters with your choice of a +1 First Strike or Vigilance counter, but you can also put whatever counters he has on him onto any non-token creatures that enter later on. Elspeth Resplendent is a Planeswalker that, once each turn, allows you to put a +1/+1 counter and one of your choice between Flying, First Strike, Lifelink, or Vigilance counters onto a creature you control. Or, if you need creatures, her -3 lets you dig 7 cards deep for a permanent with mana value 3 or less and put it directly into play with a shield counter on it. Her last ability allows you to put 5 Angels into play, but the first 2 are usually the more important ones since they offer ability counters to manipulate with Tidus and card selection. Finally, with what is, in my opinion, the best Planeswalker possible for Tidus, and maybe even the best card, if not toolkit, in the entire deck, Vivian, Monsters Advocate, has absolutely 0 irrelevant lines of text. She increases our card selection available to us by allowing us to cast our creatures from the top of our deck. Her +1 ability creates blockers that enter with our choice of Vigilance, Reach, or Trample counters on them, which we can then move around and proliferate with Tidus. And what is arguably the most important line of text is her -2, which lets us tutor a creature with lesser mana value than the one we cast directly into play. This is incredibly useful, for example, because we could cast Wingfold Terran, tutor Warden of the Grove into play, and then move to combat and with Tidus, immediately move a hexproof counter from the Terran over to the Warden, increasing its Endure effect while at the same time making it hexproof. This card is very good, and if you can afford a few upgrades that we'll talk about later on, that'll only get better. Aside from Tidus in the command zone drawing us cards and Elspeth digging for permanents, there are plenty of ways to put cards into our hand or let us cast them directly from the deck. Benthic Biomancer is a cheap way to filter your hand for the cards you're looking for, simply by placing +1/+1 counters onto them. Similarly, Fathom Mage draws you a card whenever you put a counter on her, but you don't have to discard afterwards. Cold-Eyed Selkie doesn't draw cards immediately, but does draw you cards equal to however much combat damage she deals to a player, so pumping her up also works as well, and Island Walk means she'll be connecting fairly easily in some of your games. Goldberry, River Daughter, allows you to move counters around as you please even when Tidus is off the field, and lets you draw a card if you move a counter from her onto another creature. Ingenious Prodigy also draws cards by removing counters from them at the beginning of your upkeep. Midnight Clock doubles as a mana rock that will refill your hand in 4 turn rotations, as you get a counter every upkeep, but you could speed up the process by paying mana or proliferating up to that 12th counter. Then, Ajani's Sleeper Agent lets you put a creature or planeswalker into your hand if it is on top of your deck. Beyond this, though, Ajani can also distribute counters as well as provide a way for you to end the game, with his -3 and -6 abilities respectively. Moving into this vein of top deck spells, Ranger class provides a body, repetitive counters, and the ability to cast creatures from the top of your deck as you level this class up. Falco Spara also allows you to cast spells from the top of your library, by removing a counter from a creature you control in addition to paying its other costs. With you drawing so many cards, you're likely to find one of your ways to win the game, so let's take a minute to talk about those. You've already seen Ajani's ability to poison out the table, but most of our other win conditions in the deck are combat themed. Using the board of creatures you've hopefully amassed by now, you can use Abzan Falconer to fly over the heads of your opponent's creatures, or buff up your team while tapping down every other board with Regna's Sanction, or simply use the tried and true Champion of Lamholt to swing an unblockable team at your opponents. If you needed one final push to get there, Fangs of Colonia can be overloaded to put quite a few counters on your creatures in the right scenarios. Beyond poison and damage though, it wouldn't be a Tidus-themed deck without a Blitzball-themed victory. Strixhaven Stadium builds up counters as your team does damage, and once it reaches 10 counters, it is game over for the opponent you smacked. Moving into our vein of interaction, like most of the deck already, there are a mix of generic cards that work extremely well and other cards that synergize specifically with Tidus. Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares are always premier ways to remove creatures from the board. Likewise, Stroke of Midnight and Generous Gift are more generic removal pieces that let you hit some of the harder to interact cards, like enchantments and even lands. And Croson Grip lets you hit artifacts or enchantments while being nigh uninteractable. Then we have our interaction that is a bit more niche. District Mascot is the cutest ever corgi that was, and they do a very good job at getting rid of artifacts. Scavenging Ooze is no less cute and can handle pesky cards in opponents' graveyards. Shark to Crab is a fish crab octopus that taps down opponents' creatures whenever they have +1/+1 counters placed onto them, and Storm of Forms is a Cyclonic Rift at home in this deck. When you cast it, you'll copy it for each kind of counter among permanents you control, and you can then bounce that many non-land permanents back to their owner's hand. Sometimes though, the board gets a little bit too big for even our best interaction. That's when it's time to reset, and our board wipes do a very good job at that. 3 of the 4 board wipes in our deck benefit us and break parity in some way, shape, or form. This is because if you're looking for removal, you probably want something that will allow you to maintain an advantage or even move ahead from your opponents, instead of just blank resetting everything. The only card that doesn't benefit us, and in some cases can hurt us, is Spectacular Pileup. This card will destroy any of our creatures that we happen to have out that are indestructible, but it's great for wiping a board when you think somebody might try to keep their team alive with cards like Heroic Intervention. And when you don't want to wipe your board, you can always cycle it away for a different card. Next up, Austere Command lets us pinpoint what the most problematic pieces are on board, be they large creatures, small ones, artifacts, or enchantments. Promise of Loyalty lets everyone pick a creature they want to save, and then sacrifices the rest. The creatures that lived gain Vow counters, and they cannot attack you or planeswalkers you control as long as these counters are on them. But it's worth noting with this card that if you somehow move the counters onto other creatures your opponents control, that won't affect those creatures. The Vow counters aren't actually the thing restricting the creatures from attacking. Promise of Loyalty's resolution is, and it's dependent on the counters being on the creature. Finally, the Knight of the Doctor does indeed destroy all creatures, but this saga then returns a legendary creature from your graveyard to play with an ability counter on it, from a select field. This would be great for returning Denry, Arwen, or the like back into play. Now, we've talked extensively about getting rid of creatures, but what do we have for protecting them? This leads us to the tail end of our deck, where we round out with various ways to stop our board from being destroyed or to return things back when they do go away. We have 3 different ways to make our creatures indestructible. Divine Resilience can protect a single creature for 1 mana, but if you have 4, then you can save any number of creatures on your side of the board. Duty Beyond Death grants indestructible to your board for just 2 mana and a creature being sacrificed, and at the same time, puts counters on all your surviving ones. Then, Inspiring Call grants indestructible to the creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them, and it will also draw you cards equal to however many creatures had those counters. Our final piece of protection is a pseudo Teferi's protection at a fraction of the price. Perch Protection is a 6-drop instant that makes 4 bird tokens with flying, but if you choose to give an opponent an extra turn, then all permanents you control phase out. You gain protection from everything and your life total can't change, all lasting until your next turn. This card could absolutely blow a game wide open. If someone was about to win the game by taking out every player, you can simply gift the extra turn to one of the players who would lose, and then they would no longer be in the game, so it's almost literally Tef's protection that makes a few burbs with a few mana more. Even in the worst case scenario, you can almost always gift an extra turn to somebody who's pretty behind, and so it won't matter in the long run whether or not they take that extra turn. They can't interact with you anyway. And finally, sometimes you won't have the protection you need at the right time, and your creatures will get destroyed. It happens. Well, Together Forever can return creatures with counters on them to your hand when they die. Evolution Witness goes even further and lets you return any permanent in your graveyard to your hand when they have +1/+1 counters placed onto them. Finally, for the big Uno reverse card, Ascend from Avernus lets you return all creatures and planeswalkers with mana value X or less directly into play again. This single spell could change the entire game around in one move. And that's the deck. But I can hear you saying, Cull, I have a few extra dollars lying around, how can I build a stronger deck? Well, fear not, faceless person watching my video. I've included 6 extra cards to add to Tidus that are better if you have a slightly higher budget. Sovereign Okaneka How is a way to add a lot more power to your board very quickly. Whenever they attack, if any of your creatures have power greater than the power that is printed on their card, Okanek will put more counters on them equal to the difference. Slippery Bogbonder is the only remaining card that can fit into Tidus' colors that gives a hexproof counter. Beyond that, it can also move any number of counters onto the creature it gives hexproof to. This would be incredible, for example, if you had Denry Klein out, since you could stack the triggers in a way that move all the counters onto Denry, which would then put another of each of those counters onto the Bogbonder that just entered. Archangel Elspeth is more redundancy, putting +1/+1 counters onto your creature and at the same time offering you another way to recur a ton of your creatures all at once. The one thing to note is that Elspeth's -2 permanently gives a creature flying, but this isn't an ability counter. You can neither move it nor proliferate it. If you're looking for more card draw, then Danny Pink is far and away the best card to slot into the deck. It gives all of your creatures a once per turn effect that draws you a card whenever you place counters onto them. That's approaching Nadu levels of good, since moving counters with Tidus gives you a card, and proliferating can potentially refill your entire hand, and more. Second to last, Sabsunen Luxa Embodied initially slipped under my radar, but this filth is perfect in Tidus. This 6/6 god has reach, trample, and indestructible, but has a drawback of not being able to attack or block unless she has an even number of counters on her. She also states that, at the beginning of your first main phase, put a +1/+1 counter onto her. Then, if she has an odd number of counters, draw 2 cards. A more perfect match could not have been asked for, because Tidus completely removes this creature's drawback. If Sabsunen survives until your next turn, you will place a counter on her and draw 2 cards, since she has an odd number. Then you can move to combat and either move a counter onto Sab or move one off of her, which means they will have an even number of counters and can attack. It's worth noting, though, that if Sabsunen does connect, you don't want to proliferate the counters on her unless you are proliferating an even number of counters, since that way, when you move to your next turn, again you'll place an odd counter on her and then draw 2 more cards. Man, I love frogs. This filth bangs in this deck. No, seriously, look at this frog. That right there is a good frog. Did you know that there's a card called Bounty of Luxa? It puts flood counters on things, and I am things, because man am I flooding my pants. Finally, Broker's Ascendancy is a card that I've tried to include in nearly every deck that can run it, but I always manage to cut it at the very last second. It's a great way to buff your entire board and even your planeswalkers, but I just couldn't make space for it in the deck. What did you think? I want to say I put together a pretty spicy deck for being $40, but did I miss any other better cards, or did I include some that are questionable? Again, this video was made well before the contents of the pre-constructed deck were fully revealed, so cards might be in the deck and drop, or it's more likely, cards that aren't in the deck will go up in value. I have no clue what those cards are, I just wanted to make a video with as low of a budget as I could with cards that I think are worth adding to the deck or that are hot. It is May 8th, so we are getting more Final Fantasy spoilers this weekend. So if you're looking for those, I hope you guys have a good time. I know I'll be keeping my eyes glued to the screen. I also built a non-budget restricted version of this deck, but let me know if you guys would be interested in seeing that. Otherwise, take care of yourselves, I hope you have a good one, and as always, remember to tell the people you care about that you love them. Bye!